Hey everyone, it's John from the Company of Heroes team. Today we're going to be covering our second anniversary update coming to Company of Heroes 3 on February 25th. The team will be discussing all the new additions to the game, including new maps, campaign improvements, multiplayer balance, and more. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. All right, and now I am joined by Eric Robel. Some like to call him the design director for Co3, but I like to call him my friend.
Oh, thanks, John.
Eric,
Happy to be here.
How you doing?
I am feeling as good as I look right now.
Perfect. So, Eric, we're obviously here to talk about all of the improvements coming in our second anniversary update. I know we've got a ton of stuff coming to the campaign to improve that experience for our single player minded players. But do you want to cover some of the other stuff that the team is doing first before we kind of jump into the nuts and bolts of the campaign stuff?
Yeah, 2.0 is absolutely massive for us. So kind of, since 1.0, we've gone over every system, everything in the game to improve the quality level. So we're, it's been a long road to get here, but
Yeah.
we're really happy with where we arrived. So some of the new things specifically for 2.0 that we've got coming in with the visuals, we've got like some improvements to the blood effects to give them a bit more sort of like texture and shine to them. There's some general improvements to some of the fire effects. And then also, we've made some really nice improvements on the music side of things. So first off, with that, there were a number of maps where the ambient audio wasn't working. So you'll hear, like birds chirping and, like wind blowing, like that kind of ambient things to make it feel a bit more like an actual real place, that you're battling over. And on the sort of like, I don't know, like cinematic like feel and like emotion of the battle, we've added a couple of like bursts or like we call them like stingers or whatever, to add some like excitement at like kind of key moments. So based off of like how many tickets the different players have, you'll hear some extra sort of like pops and zings and stuff going on in there.
So I know we also have added some new icons to replace some of the older legacy ones. Is that right?
Yeah, we get a lot of icons updated. And so we're pretty excited about having some shiny new looking awesome icons in the game. Just, overall just it feels more, professional, like higher quality level, and yeah, they look really great. So we're excited for everyone to get to enjoy those.
Yeah, more matching sort of the other Co3 icons.
The style of
the
the rest of the game,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think the last two big ones, obviously we have the new battle groups coming into the update as well. So new effects and audio and visuals for those battle groups. And I think one of the fun ones that players can discover on their own when they're playing the U.S. forces is we've completely redone the Intel announcement lines from the U.S. forces, right?
Yeah, all of them, right? So yeah, that was pretty big, and yeah, they those sound really great. We've also updated the color of the icons for the U.S. tanks, which doesn't sound like a big deal. And like when our UI artist brought it up, we're like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever, do it. And then we saw it in game, we're like, oh, wow, this actually looks significantly better. So
okay, nice.
Yeah, sort of quality changes across the board, basically.
Okay, perfect. So again, players can find the details on that in the patch notes the day that the update goes out.
It's gonna be long patch notes, John. I thank you so much for in advance for doing all the patch notes, because like it's gonna be a lot of editing there.
Yeah.
You got your Sharpie, your red pen ready?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So Eric, I know we talk a lot about multiplayer on these deep dives, but I know there are a ton of single player folks who spend a lot of time in the campaign. So what are we kind of doing there to improve that experience for those players? And maybe we can start with like, what were some of your big objectives for you and the team going into this update, for that campaign experience?
Yeah, great question, John. And in general, we have a bunch of multiplayer and a bunch of single player players, so we want to make sure we're servicing both groups of players that we have. And we haven't really done a lot of campaign stuff in a while, so to make part of 2.0 is like we want to make sure everything is really increased in the quality level. And so with the campaign in particular, the Italian campaign map, we wanted to make sure that the players' decisions mattered, because the player's making a lot of decisions, every single turn, but some of those, it didn't matter as much like which thing you picked. And so if it's not a compelling choice, like why are we giving you a choice if it doesn't matter that much, right? So we kind of added, I would say, depth to a lot of the systems. So, for example, when you're picking which company you want to build, you're like, okay, well, do I want a tank, artillery, infantry, and do I want, like a British one or American one, right? And all of those units kind of function the same. Like they all could heal, they all could march, they all, it was just like, well, these feel like there was some difference, right? Like we added the rock, paper, scissor thing. So kind of depending on what you're fighting against.
Yeah.
But like mechanically moving the units around and stuff didn't feel that different. So we kind of like took an approach that was like addition by subtraction. So to give each unit a more distinct role in terms of like what it's going to be doing on the battlefield, we ended up adding some new abilities as well as like taking abilities away from some of the units so that like not every unit is a generalist, not every unit can do everything. So the biggest one off the bat is taking away the heal ability from the vehicles. So the infantry units are meant to be more of like, they're kind of like support. So infantry units can heal and they can build a bunch of the detachments, and then they can do like the scouting ability.
Okay.
So they're supposed to be supporting, and keep in mind the infantry heal ability, it works on themselves, and it also works on all your other units, right? So, having an infantry with a tank is a pretty good pairing. The thing that the infantry lost is the march ability. So they can patrol to see further, but they can't march to get across the terrain really quickly. And so that's what the vehicles do, both the artillery and the tanks. They have exclusive use of the march ability. So when you need to get from one place to another really quickly, tanks are really good. So when you're building up your forces, you want to be aware of like the different capabilities of all these different units, and you're going to want to mix them. And there's multiple factors now in terms of like how you create that mix. So for example, sorry, there's so much to say. I'm gonna pop back and forth a little bit, but we'll get there in the end, right?
Yeah.
So we also changed the distribution of resource costs for these units. And also we wanted to have like as much kind of like similarity between like the core skirmish game and the map gameplay as well. So you'll notice now that the tanks have a really high fuel cost and a smaller manpower cost versus the infantry have a pretty small fuel cost and a high amount of manpower. So that's an extra thing to weigh into your decision making, where it's like, oh, okay, I just used a whole bunch of manpower on healing, but I need another squad, so I'm gonna pick a tank, and then I can spend that extra fuel. Versus, maybe it's the opposite. You have a bunch of manpower, so you're gonna build an infantry squad, or you might just want the infantry squad because the enemy has a bunch of vehicles and you need to deal with the vehicles, right? So there's more to think about in considering when you're picking the different units that you have available.
Okay, so it's no longer just sort of the rock paper scissors of they have this type of company, so I need to build its counter.
Yeah.
Now you have all these other variables that you need to consider as well, right?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
Very cool. So how do these decisions at the campaign map affect some of the RTS battles that you'll be fighting in the missions and the skirmishes?
Yeah, so we changed up the roster of both starting units and units that you have access to.
Okay.
Into the skirmish battles. So one thing actually we're really excited to add is that the tanks all actually have the heavy tanks that we've added in the 2.0.
Oh.
And that's just like free content too. You don't have to like buy the expansion to get it or whatever. You can just have it.
Yeah.
So those, since they're bigger, chunkier things, you are gonna have to pay some skill points to unlock it, right? But that means when you're fighting with the tanks and you have access to that, you'll start with a whole bunch more vehicles than before and like less infantry. So fighting with a tank versus fighting with an infantry, it's going to be a very different experience on that battlefield because the access to the units is different. We also added a few more like kind of like custom units in there, like the combat engineers and that kind of stuff. We added a couple more additions to the squads as well to really make them feel more distinct in those battles.
Very cool. So even if I don't have the Fire and Steel DLC, I can still play with the Pershing and the Croc if I'm playing the campaign.
Exactly. It's like first hit's free. Try it out if you like it. Maybe don't. Whatever.
Yeah.
Try it out. It's free. That's for you.
Very cool. So What about movement? I know when we were talking before this, you mentioned something about wanting just the feel of movement to be better for the player.
Yeah, so that's the fundamental action that you're taking every turn is you're moving these units, right? And so if that doesn't feel good, the whole experience is not going to feel very good, right? Um, so we noticed that like it just like after you click the button, it just like takes a long time for the unit to get there. And also the more like twists and turns, like the units kind of took a while, like because we have this like realistic physics systems, right? And like that's how it works in skirmish, which is great for skirmish because you're doing a lot of other things, right? So it's fine for the units to move slower and move really realistically. But on this campaign map, since you're just waiting for that single unit to move, like it needed to feel really snappy and responsive.
Right.
So we tightened up the timing and the movement for those units, as well as some of the animations. So where it was like you would click to like attack a territory, and like you'd see the attack go, and then like there wouldn't be any action. You'd
Yeah,
kind of
you'd
just
like wait a beat for
yeah,
finish.
and it was like it was a couple seconds, right? And so you're just like, is it doing anything? And then it'd be like territory captured, and you're like, oh, like okay, I guess it worked, right? But like that, there's that like little disconnect and like doubt every time you try to attack a territory of like, is this actually working? So we tightened up the animations and the timing there, so it's like you attack the thing, the enemy runs out, and then you get it, right? So it feels a lot more responsive and a lot more the way you would expect it to, basically.
Okay, awesome. What about sort of player feedback in terms of like UI and UX? I know there's some adjustments there for communicating information to the player.
Yeah. So, and we kind of looked at like a lot of things within the gameplay. Like we just, put more hours into it and find like, oh yeah, like I've been playing this thing for 40 hours and like this part is like really annoying me, right? So things like, you had to move every single unit when you hit end turn, or the end turn thing would be like, hey, you didn't like move every single unit, but because it's a tactical map, you don't want to move every unit every turn, right? So like units where you have like a hold position on them, or if it's like it's garrisoned and you're trying to heal it, it won't bother you about those units. And like the flow for that is kind of tough too, because you actually have to like hit end turn like twice. It'll be
Right.
like it'll tell you about a unit, and then if you don't immediately hit end turn again, then it just like pops up that message again, right? So like that message was kind of like a little bit too in your face. So we've kind of like streamlined that flow, so you're not going to be seeing that as often, unless it is like a really critical thing, because we do in general want you to move all your units, or you opted out to like, I don't want to move this unit, right?
Right. Okay.
And then also like some smaller things like the end turn hotkey. It was like control and spacebar, which was like a little. It's like, well, why is it that? So it's like, let's just make it spacebar, right? So it's just like easier to like, because there's quite a few turns that are happening in this, right? It's gonna take you 50 plus turns to beat the whole thing. So like,
Right.
since you're doing that action constantly, we want it to be easy and smooth for players.
Yeah. I know we also changed the hospital sort of healing aura, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's the UI was like these little tiny like red dots, and if there was a mountain anywhere, which spoiler, we're in Italy,
Yeah,
there might be some Alps around,
Yeah.
right? So quite a few times it was like really difficult to notice, like, am I in the healing aura or not? So we wanted to be that to be really easy to understand and interface with. So now there's like a very clear like circle, so like, oh, I'm in the aura or I'm not in the aura. And this is more important now as well, because we made it that if a unit is in that aura at the end of the turn, it'll just get some healing automatically. So there's not as much like manually, like having to use your own healing abilities. So it made it like feel a bit unique from the way that the other healing kind of works.
Okay. So I know we touched on some of the changes to the campaign companies in terms of like their roles and some of the abilities that they have. Do you maybe want to dig into that a little bit deeper with some of the specifics for each company? Or I know something changed with the loot ability.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to cover it before, but there was just like a lot of topics I was kind of going all over the place with. So there were a number of abilities that were like fairly low impact. So it's like you didn't really use them that much. You might not notice they were there. They didn't change the way you would interface with the game or play.
Yeah.
And because of that, the units felt more homogenous and similar, because they had a bunch of abilities that didn't really do that much, right? So with the loot ability, we found in general, yeah, that wasn't like a super high impact ability. And so we basically completely redesigned that one. And because we took the healing off the tanks, we kind of had this idea that, well, each unit could gain access to healing in a different way. To make them feel more distinct, right? So the loot ability will now heal your tanks if you take a territory from the enemy. And it's a pretty chunky heal. It's like 40% of your health.
Okay.
So that means there's some different strategic considerations when you're attacking territories. So it's like, well, if my tank's not damaged, maybe I want to try to like fight something and take some damage and then attack that place. And also with your ordering, if there's a couple shields on that space, right, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to send in the Marines. They're going to take out the shields, and then the tank can get in there and use the loot ability and be able to heal itself.
Right.
So there's more, kind of like strategic considerations
Gotcha.
with that loot ability versus just like a kind of a passive thing that just kind of happened every turn, and sometimes it mattered, but a lot of times it didn't.
Yeah. I know we were also talking about some of the special abilities for some of the individual companies. Maybe we want to cover some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we wanted the healing to feel unique on the companies, and we also wanted the movement to feel a bit unique. So let me just jump back and tie a bow on the healing thing.
Sure.
So for the Indian artillery, since we took the heal off that one, we added a new. So this one's it's accessed a little bit different. You do need to like spend skill points to unlock it, but it's the first thing that Indian artillery can get, and they have a thing that'll heal them if they didn't attack that turn, which is. Sort of the theme and fantasy of that one is like it's kind of it's bombarding, it's standing more in the back line, so it's not going to be like up there taking hits as often. So that's sort of like a unique feel for that one. And it also you're kind of like go always like pushing forward in this, so it's also just sort of try to like change up the pacing a little bit of like, oh, maybe I actually want to take a turn to hold back and like heal up my forces instead of just constantly pushing forward.
Yeah.
Okay, healing, good, thumbs up. So the rest of the abilities, there are many. So each unit kind of like got like an update basically. So for the air and sea unit, we gave them an ability where their mobility thing, right, is now that they can take a boat. So anytime they're on the coast, you can use this ability and click somewhere on the coast, and it'll just move them up there, and it won't even like take up their movement points or whatever.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
So with your other companies and stuff, you have to like go into a port and then garrison from there. So this anytime you're on the beach, you can just get in a boat and just like zip up there. So it gives them a very powerful mobility tool, but it's only accessible in certain areas of the map, right? So when you're building that squad, if you're planning on sending that squad to the interior of the map, like that probably isn't the best choice, right? You probably want to build one of the other 3 infantry squads, right? And so the other infantry squads, we've got for the commandos, they're sort of like thing is like rough terrain is what they're good at. And right now, rough terrain is pretty brutal, right? Like moving on a road is like 1, but then like the rough terrain is 2, 3, or 4 movement points. So like if you go very, very slow. If
it's
you're
pretty punishing.
So you basically are like always on the roads, which is cool. So then the idea of this unit is you're kind of like breaking that mold, and you can just like have them run off into the Alps or whatever, right? And they can just like zoom around. So there's some particular spots on the map where there aren't good road connections, and so sending those units to capture those territories is going to be like way faster and more effective.
Okay.
So it makes them feel quite a bit different. So we're really happy with that. And then the other infantry we have is the paratroopers. And so the paratroopers, it was like, well, to use their special ability, it's like you had to build a plane, and then you had to like garrison them in a place in an airport, and then they were able to like use the ability, right? So there were like a lot of hoops you had to go through, so you didn't get to use the ability very often. So it didn't feel like it was part of the core identity of the unit. So we basically completely redesigned that one, and now instead of being like a passive thing, it's an active. And so you can click this ability, and then you click a nearby town or whatever thing you own, a fuel depot, whatever, and it'll just pop them right up to that location, and you'll see them like come down in their with their paratrooper thing.
Parachutes?
Parachute, yes, the parachute. So we got like a nice little animation there, and so it's a nice way to like oh, there's like a mountain, so let me just like paratroop over here, right?
Right.
So that gives it like a unique feel because you can only do it for territories you own, right? So you can't use it as, like offensively per se, but it can be a nice tool to like get over and, circumvent some of these like rough terrain in like a different way.
Yeah, it's like reinforce some of your territory or like stop an enemy advance or something.
Yeah, totally. So we feel like they're all playing and feeling like quite different and uniquely now, which
Okay.
is really cool. In addition to those, like sort of core identity abilities that they each have, and some of them we didn't need to change, right? Because the artillery, it has that bombard ability. It's great, right? You can use it. It's got a nice AOE, so you can kind of like line it up to like hit multiple units, or maybe you can kill an emplacement and kill, a town shield at the same time, right? Like that one's great. Does a lot of good things. But also, we wanted to make the building gameplay a bit more intriguing, like sort of offer an extra sort of path or way people could play the game.
Okay.
And supply is really tight this game in terms of like your population cap or whatever. So you can generally not field a huge number of units, right?
Right.
So anything that like takes up your population cap, you're like, this is a super valuable resource, so I have to be careful to use this correctly. And because all the emplacements were using up population cap, you didn't really want to build them because I'm going to sit this thing and it defends like a very specific area of the map, but the map's huge, right? And so then when you're going forward and taking more areas of the map, that emplacement ends up being kind of irrelevant, but it's taking up your population cap, right? So we just took off the population cap for the emplacement. So now you can just like go wild and like spam these things if you want to, right?
Yeah.
So that was the idea of that was like, yeah, like, just like have fun and try out some wacky new strategies and stuff like that. And so like the infantry, since they're kind of like the support unit, they're generally doing more of that like building type stuff. But yeah, it just offers like another way to play, another way to experience the game.
Okay, cool. So I know we also shortened the campaign map tutorial because I think we found it was a little bit slow. We wanted to get people into the action faster. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, so about like getting into the action, right? It was like the things you were doing in that like initial campaign, they didn't really persist or carry over to like the next part of the game. And at the end of it, it was like kind of like you weren't learning that much new stuff. You're kind of just doing the same thing you had already kind of learned. So we're like, people like fighting skirmish battles, right? It's company heroes. So how can we like get them into those battles faster, right? So that will be a quicker like tutorial type of event for people. In addition to that, we were sort of like doing some analysis of the map with this, like high level goal of we want to get people into the battles sooner. And we realized that a lot of the starting territories didn't have skirmish battles.
Okay.
So once you started playing, you oftentimes could spend quite a long period of time before you got to fight another skirmish battle. So we wanted to add more skirmishes, but we didn't want to just make it so that you were like, doing redundant content or you're playing the same skirmishes over and over again, right? That's not going to be exciting or fun for anyone. So what we did is we were able to pull in some of the new maps. So we added some new 1v1 maps and like brand new, we also added in some 2v2 maps as well.
Okay.
So that's something you didn't see like anywhere in the campaign before where you have an ally, an AI ally, and you and that ally have to work together to fight the other two AI enemies.
Okay.
So it adds a really nice extra sort of like flavor and like unique type of feel to it, and we specifically like spread out the 2v2s so that you wouldn't be like fighting 2 or 3 in a row. It's like there's one 2v2 over here and then like one, so like every now and again it'll pop out. But you're like, oh cool, this is a fun little like novel experience for us.
Yeah, because I know one of the pieces of feedback that we saw from players after we made some campaign changes, I think back in like 1.4 in Steel Shepherd, is they felt that after those changes there weren't enough skirmishes.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
the initial complaint was like there were too many skirmishes, and then we made a change. And it's like, well, okay, now there's not enough.
We're honing in on it,
Right,
John.
yeah,
We kind of swung from one direction to the other.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like these changes will address some of those concerns and like we said, get people into the action faster, and we have more skirmishes, especially in that earlier starting zone where we didn't have as many as before.
yeah, exactly. More skirmishes and more variety to the skirmishes as well.
I'm excited about the 2v2 skirmishes for the campaign because that lets the player have some sort of larger scale RTS battles to sort of break things up.
Yeah, and it's like a very different like dynamic as well, where you have, if you're just trying to fight on your own against two AIs, like that's probably going to be too hard, right? So you
Yeah.
kind of got to see like what's my AI doing, where are they at, and how can I sort of like maximize that, right? Because
Right.
if you can work together with the AI, then you can really like stomp some faces, right?
Yeah, yeah. I also don't want to gloss over what you said earlier because you mentioned new maps as well. So that means we're hoping that you see those maps more frequently and you don't see as many repeats, if ever,
Exactly.
throughout like a one campaign playthrough. So again, just kind of keeping things as fresh as possible.
This is a fresh update. A
Yeah.
lot of fresh baking has been going into this.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the last big things we probably want to touch on is the loyalty system. What's going on there?
Yeah. So there's the loyalty system, and in general, like with like the context of all these changes, because there's so many, right, and it's like a lot of moving parts. We're trying to make sure like the overall balance of the campaign doesn't swing too far in one direction or the other. So like with the loyalty system, we made a number of buffs, right? And part of the reason we did that is that we've also increased the challenge level for players. So in general, we had feedback where it's like, the AI kind of feels a bit like a speed bump or whatever, where it's like it slows you down, but it doesn't really like come at you, right?
Right.
Like you never really like have that fear of like, oh, I might actually like lose this thing, right? So we added these attack waves in
Okay.
that'll spawn for the player.
Yeah.
And we also scaled these attack waves like with the difficulty. So if you're playing on like expert, it's gonna send like a big squad of like 4 at you. Versus if you're playing on the easier, it'll just send like 1 extra unit at you. So we wanted to like preserve drastic differences in the difficulty level, so that if you're a new player, you're not gonna get like overwhelmed with these crazy attack waves. And then for people who don't know exactly how all the difficulty works, right? The units on the expert, their units are just like stronger than yours, right? So like if you have an equal level unit, theirs is just gonna like do more damage to yours. Versus easy, it's the opposite, and yours
Yeah.
are gonna like have an advantage, right?
Right. So do these attack waves kind of seek out your companies, or are they kind of hitting your friendly territories? How does that work?
Yeah. So they'll spawn kind of like in various, like they could kind of spawn from any territory the enemy has. So like you actually do need to be careful, because if you take most of an area, but there's still like one little province,
Yeah.
they could have like an attack wave of like 4 units spawn in there and then just start like wreaking havoc through your territory.
Right. Or I guess if you overextend and then get hit with one of these waves, you could find your companies a little cut off a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Your stuff is pushed all out, and then they come from the backside. You're not gonna have anything to defend, and they're gonna start taking your territories back.
Okay.
So it definitely adds an extra, kind of like wrench that gets thrown into things. And there are a lot of tools and stuff you have, right? Like we were talking about, like, oh yeah, like building defenses is now more important because the AI actually attacks you, right?
Right.
And like, oh, if you can, like line up a bombing run to hit like a couple of those attackers in one shot, which I've been able to do. It's like really satisfying because you're like, oh no, I'm in a lot of trouble here. So you
Yeah.
can kind of use all your tools and stuff like that to deal with those attacks. But the question you actually asked me, loyalty
Yeah,
system,
yeah.
right? So yeah, we made some updates to the loyalty system because the difficulty level was increased, and also a number of the unlocks in the loyalty system didn't change the gameplay in like very significant or meaningful ways. So number one thing we wanted with the loyalty system was to remove the penalties, because it kind of, it might take you like 10 turns to unlock this new loyalty ability from the commander, and then you do like the wrong thing, and then you lose that access to that ability, right?
Right,
Like
okay.
it was kind of not super fun to have that happen to you. So it's a purely like a progression system, right? It's just going to go up for you now. And we've added like hover over tooltips to all the generals, so you know what to do to like appease them as well. Because before it's like, well, I really want to make Valenti happy. How do I do that, right? So now you can see exactly what you need to do for each of the generals. So it was a nice little communication quality of life thing. But in general, we've resorted the order of some of the passives, because the ones where the general would like join you for the final battle, right? that's only useful at the very end of the game when you're fighting the
Right,
final
yeah,
battle. But you would get it before the end of the tree, right? So it's like you get it and it just does nothing, and then you're just unlocking more stuff, right? And you're like, well, why did I get this thing,
Yeah.
right? So we pushed all those to the end of the tree, so you actually have to like fully vet up the general to the max level to be able to get those things. So it feels more like an epic reward for the end of the tree to help you in the last battle against the enemy.
Okay.
And then there's a number of the passives too, where it was like, oh, they were doing things that were sort of small in magnitude. It's like, if you spend 10 turns to unlock one of these things, you want it to be like good, right? So we went through and sort of like did a balance pass on a number of those. There's also quite a few of them where we kind of just like did a redesign of it, where we just like totally updated it and like, okay, now here's like a new cool sort of like toy to play with, basically. So like one of them, for example, is when you attack emplacements, you get like triple the reward for munitions, right? So instead of getting 20, you can get like 60 munitions for taking out these things. So
Not too shabby, yeah.
yeah, so oftentimes I found when I was playing, it was like I would kind of ignore those things. It's like if there's a critical one that was bombing me, I'd hit it, I'd take it out. But once you take the territory, their hit points just go down automatically over time, right? So I'm like, they'll just take attrition and die, right?
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, I can like farm munitions if I can like pop off a whole bunch of these
Right,
things.
okay.
So the idea is, as you're unlocking these things, it kind of changes your tactics a bit for the gameplay.
Okay. Very cool. So I think that kind of covers all the bullet point list that we had here.
Woo!
Eric,
Did it.
I know that was a ton to get through in half an hour. So do you have any sort of final thoughts about like all the work that you and the team have put into the campaign improvements here for the second anniversary? Maybe some of your, again, circle back to some of your objectives in terms of like, how do you want the player to sort of feel as they're playing through this? And yeah, just like, because for me, it sounds like this is a new time, or the perfect time to start a brand new save.
100%.
And play through this all over again.
Everything is going to be backwards compatible though. So if you're like in the middle of a game that you're really enjoying and you're on turn 30 or whatever, you load it in there and you'll have, all your units and everything will still be there. So
Excellent.
you can continue a save if you want.
Okay.
But also having, fresh from the beginning is kind of like the ideal experience, I would say, where you can now have access to all these tools right from the get-go and be able to make, some really cool decisions and just, getting to think more deeply about the choices that you're making, because it's like, well, if I build the wrong unit and then, I don't have the march and I can't get over there in time to defend my stuff, right? Like that stuff all matters and is really important now.
Yeah.
So this pass is like really adds a lot of depth to the C-map, and it just feels better, more responsive and stuff like that, in addition to being more strategic and deep. So
C map is dev talk for campaign map.
yeah, campaign map, sorry. And yeah, I think this was really rewarding for us to work on, because the C map is kind of like a big board game, right? And board games, big fan. So being able to do all this stuff was really cool to make our like board game, have a lot of depth and strategy and intrigue to it. So I think in general we're just like really excited for players to like get in there and get to try it out and give us feedback and see what they like. And this is a persistent online game, right? So we're gonna continue to like make improvements and stuff to it, but like this is definitely like the best version of it. Like this is feeling really good.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear, Eric. I'm sure players are excited to get their hands on it and try it out for themselves. Again, folks, all of these campaign improvements will be in the second anniversary update. But let's head to our next segment. Thanks so much, Eric, and we'll chat with you later.
Yeah, thanks, John. I love coming on here and chatting Company Heroes 3.
All right, and now I am joined by Will, so that means we must be talking about maps. For those that don't know you, Will, can you quickly introduce yourself and tell us what do you do on Company of Heroes 3?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Will. I am senior designer and multiplayer map designer on Company of Heroes 3.
Okay, and I know you also do a lot with our voice talent, and I know we briefly mentioned that on last week's Battle Group Deep Dive. We're doing a bunch of new VO for the game as well with this update, so very exciting to have you here. I know our focus right now is going to be on maps, but is there anything you want to say about VO first?
Just that we're excited to see what people think. We've had an opportunity to get back into the recording studio with a bunch of our existing characters. So, for example, our heavy tanks, they had another shot at it. To get some extra lines for the new vehicles. We had an opportunity to create a brand new character for the US heavy armor. So our Pershing has a unique voice. We got back in with our Intel characters as well. So the British, DAC, and Wehrmacht Intel characters have got new lines for new abilities that came online with the previous battle groups as well. We've been able to get unique lines recorded for them too, which is lovely. And it also gave us an opportunity to recast and re-record our US Intel character. I mentioned in the previous live stream that we originally went with quite a youthful, naive character because we wanted to portray the US Army when it's first starting out. It's their first engagements in North Africa and Europe. Over time, that theme just hasn't gelled as well as we'd like. It came across as a little bit too jovial. So we went for a little bit more serious, more down-to-earth character. But it was lovely to use that as an opportunity to get new lines for all the new content that's coming as well.
Okay, and speaking of new content, we have new maps. So with this being Co3's second anniversary, we want to revisit everything Company of Heroes and bring back some fan favorite maps from Company of Heroes 1 and 2. So can you tell us what's on the docket for today? How many maps are we bringing back?
We are bringing back 4 maps, but in 5 iterations.
Okay.
No, that's wrong. We're bringing back 3 maps in 4 iterations. There'll be 5 maps total.
Perfect. So I think we also have a community map, right, rounding things out today.
Exactly, yes. We've brought in a map called Jebel Pass from GB Pirate, which people have known about for a very long time. We finally have an opportunity to bring it in.
Okay, excellent. So I know we were very, very selective when picking these maps. We had a lot of discussions with players, obviously, behind closed doors. So did we do any sort of, I'm sure we'll get into this in more detail, but did we sort of tweak things based on player feedback?
Absolutely, yeah. It must be apparent for a lot of people who have played classic maps that we brought back, like Steppes and Monthermé and Semois. Bringing maps back exactly as they were in Co1 and Co2 won't necessarily work. Not only is it a different engine, it's not as easy as just grabbing the files and dropping it into Co3 and it all of a sudden works. Right. All of the art is brand new. The only things that we can really bring over are the height map, so that's the terrain. And we can take a top-down view of the old maps and lay that over as if it's a layer of wallpaper. So we can kind of see where all the roads and buildings and stuff would go. That's all we can really save. But things like territory need to be designed from scratch. A lot of the cover needs to be adjusted. Co3 also plays very differently to how Co1 and Co2 did. They all had the different flows and metas. Some things just simply don't work. Keep in mind as well, like in Co1, there was no vaulting. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the maps were designed around forcing you into certain pathways. They would become routes to be mined. And in Co2, there were things like mud and snow tech that we just don't have in Co3. So there were a lot of these decisions that had to be made early on. Where do we want to make improvements? How far do we want to go with it? How can we keep the identity of the original maps? Right. Without changing them too much, but also bringing them into the aesthetic and the theme of Co3.
Okay, so let's maybe get into the first one. Can you reveal for us our first 1v1 map?
Our first map is the absolute classic in Angoville.
Mm-hmm. So we'll take a look at it right here with some a quick walkthrough right now. But again, a classic Co1 map. Tell me a little bit about why did we want to bring back Angoville, and maybe how has this changed between its first iteration and with Co3?
Yeah, so Angoville is one of my favorite maps. It's one of the first maps I played in Co1. Forever burned into my memories as an absolute classic. And it's notorious around the studio as being one of the most famous Co maps because it was one of the first. It was a very cutthroat map in Co1, and it continues to be cutthroat in Co2. In Co3. We created a version in Co2 that didn't play particularly well. I know it wasn't a very popular choice in Co2, mostly because the territory changed. But we're returning to a similar style of the Co1's territory layout. For those who aren't familiar with it, if you can visualize, you have fuel points in opposite corners, and you have cutoffs, 4 major cutoffs, 2 on each side of the map. So it's extremely easy to travel through the middle of the map and cut off all the resources to the sides. So there's as much fighting in the middle, despite there being no resources there, as there are on these high resources to the flanks.
Right.
We've adjusted the resources ever so slightly, so it's not plus 16s in the corners, because that can make it very swingy. We wanted to make the games last a little longer than a extremely cutthroat 10 minutes, which some of the matches were. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to work on this one.
And I imagine with Co3's territory system and income system being a little bit more similar to Co1's, it makes sense for to return to how Angoville was originally laid out, right?
Exactly, yeah. We've made some other minor changes that you'll notice in the capture circles, for example, are smaller. Because Co1 didn't have capture circles, and we brought those in from Co2. Because it's such a small map and there are so many points near each other, the capture circles were almost overlapping. Some units with bigger formations, like Gurkhas, for example, they could capture 2 points at once. In some places, they could almost capture 3 points at once. Mm-hmm. So we've reduced the capture circles on all the points. In fact, I believe we've done it on a couple of the new maps.
Okay.
So interesting to see how those go down as well.
All right. So you alluded to the fact that are the different games play very, very differently. So as a player, maybe a veteran player or as a novice player, how should I be approaching my matches on this map in these 1v1 head-to-heads? What are some of the main differences between how I play this in Co3 versus how I might play it in Co1?
So how you would play it in both games is similar, but the tools at your disposal are going to be very different, mostly because we have a lot more tools available in Co3. Co1, there were some very nasty strategies, things like wiring off specific buildings or some of the narrow routes, planting mines where you could goad greyhounds that might try and base dive you, for example. That was metaformed over years. With Co3, the same idea stands for the map. So you have two sides, very open towards the west, and then more farmhouses and hedgerows to the east. So if you're going to be playing close quarters with flamethrowers, mines, MGs even, use the east side of the map and try and hold those buildings. If you're going to be favoring more light vehicles and long-range weapons like AT guns, mortars, the west side of the map is more suited for you. And it isn't uncommon at all to find players who favor one side or the other will just completely dominate that entire side, almost up to the base of the next player.
Right.
And just hold one side, because the resources are essentially the same on either side. So you can get weird games like that, where you're just knocking on your neighbor's door without pushing into their base.
Okay. Anything else to say about Angoville before we move to the next one?
Just that we worked quite closely with competitive players on this one, because we wanted to make sure we got it right. So there are some minor adjustments to make things better. We still welcome all feedback on these, and we'll talk about that a little bit later and where to leave feedback. But because this is such a favored map, we wanted to keep that spirit of what Angoville was, and I hope you agree that we've done it justice.
Okay. So our 1v1 players are definitely feasting this update. Tell me about our revisit to Langres.
Langres. Yes. So Langres, for those who don't know, was a community map originally. It was a Co1 community map. Was very, very successful, got ported over into Co2, became more brutal in Co2 because of its size and its victory point layout. It is, I believe, the smallest map in the game. And you can feel that because you're playing on the sides, not in the corners, like you were in Angoville. So in Angoville, you're playing a little bit wider, whereas Langres is very, very close. You are always within range of your opponent. Pretty much as soon as you step out your base, there's a high chance that you'll be in combat.
Yeah.
But with the same points with Angoville, we wanted to kind of bring it up to speed for Co3, make sure that it benefits from all the balance passes that it's seen over the years. So we've done a little bit of adjustments of hedgerows, because Langres is famous for the hedgerow formations that it has throughout the map. Some of them have been re-added, the ones that were taken out of Co2, and others have been moved. Similarly for the buildings, there are some pretty dominant buildings on the either side of this map where we've adjusted those where we can. This is a map I can see will probably need some balanced feedback at some point, some updates as people playing it, because it's going to be brutal.
Yeah.
But that was the whole point. It was very, very popular. It was a highly requested map to bring back as well. just because of how short, sharp, and brutal those games are. Even in testing, you could tell straight away that this is not the kind of map that's going to drag on for 40 minutes plus. This is going to be over and done with. You'll probably get 2 games in for every one you would in any other mode. So
Okay.
it's that kind of map.
All right. Did we make any other sort of changes outside of the ones that you mentioned, or do you want to talk about how we play on this map?
There are some visual changes. So previously, the original version of Langres was nice and green and lush. In CO2, it went quite muddy and wintry and brown, and with this one, we've gone autumnal. So we're kind of meeting halfway. But no, let's jump on to how to play it.
Yeah. So again, if I'm new to CO3 and I've never played on Langres, what should I be looking for?
So Langres is what we call a rotation map. It spirals clockwise. So your resources as you leave your HQ and go clockwise are the safest and easiest to capture. And you can essentially keep on going clockwise until you end up at your enemy base. Your opponent is going to be doing the same thing. They'll be going clockwise and they'll be appearing on your right flank. And if you push to the middle, there's not really much in the way of resources there, but there's the central victory point, and there's also cut-offs. So if you go through the center, you will find strategic points that will cut off those resources to your opponent's clockwise direction, and they have the same for you. If they push towards your base through the middle, they will cut off your clockwise rotation as well. So it's all about rotating or choosing whether to go counterclockwise if you want to try and beat them at their own game.
Right.
You'll struggle to keep your resources connected as easily if you go counterclockwise, but you'll almost guaranteed run into their units if you go that way.
Okay.
So it's quite different, unlike Angoville that was essentially you go either straight through the middle or to either side, and you can pick whichever side you want. This one encourages you to take the clockwise route.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to see players jump into matches on this map because, again, like you said, it's a fan favorite. A lot of people wanted to see it back.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to the next one. And again, this is a little bit special because we have a classic map, but we've got 2 versions of it. So
We do.
Tell me about Crossing in the Woods. I know we had a bit of a sneak peek again last week in the Battle Group deep dive, but let's maybe talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so Crossing in the Woods is still one of the most, if not the most played 2v2 maps in CO2. It debuted in CO1. Some people may not know that. It was under a different name. I don't think it was incredibly popular at the time, but it started there, and it still uses a lot of the same layout and cover and everything from then. But when we brought it into the new engine for CO3, it became immediately apparent that it's too small. It would have been the smallest 2v2 map across any of our games. So we made the decision to make 2 versions of it. The original size map from CO1 and CO2 is going to be the 1v1 version.
Ah, okay.
It's a decent size for a 1v1 because it's playing corner to corner. There are some far corners that you might have to reach out to. But otherwise, it plays very, very similarly. It's very familiar. Whereas the 2v2 version is slightly extended. We've added about, I think it's between 32 and 64 meters on either side. So all 4 sides, they're all a little bit further out. Gives you some more flanking maneuvers and routes to slip by unnoticed. Those who have played Crossing will know that it gets very campy very quick because you are locking down the river. So MGs, for example, and AT guns can hold major areas. So having these additional width routes around the side can really help sneak in, especially with light vehicles. But as a result, we don't have one of the core mechanics from CO1 and CO2, which is negative cover. The river previously used to be very deadly to cross, but because we don't have negative cover in CO3, you're going to need those flanking routes more than ever.
Right. So when it comes to looking at a map and assessing it, is it really just a size thing where you kind of say, like, you know what, this just feels too claustrophobic, we need to stretch it out a little bit? Was that sort of the equation or the math that you had to do?
Yeah.
Or is there more there?
It isn't necessarily even in the numbers. You can tell just by playing a game on a map that's too small, and it will feel claustrophobic. You almost feel like there's not enough opportunities to get around your opponent. So in 2v2 on the original map, for example, you could probably lock down the entire map with just 4 MGs. And in 2v2, the chances are you could get 4 MGs very easily.
Right, yeah.
So that's what kind of rang alarm bells. We did some playtesting with some of our top players. We've got loads of feedback on that map because that was also highly requested. And yeah, it became apparent very quickly. So that was an overnight fix. That was a quick job to try and get a new prototype out that let you, play it 2v2 or 1v1.
Okay.
And it felt immediately better. So just one of those things of being on a different engine.
Okay, and like I said, you can get a closer look at it in last week's Battle Group Deep Dive. Any other sort of final thoughts on Crossing in the Woods, either version of those?
I mean, they're both classics. They'll be very, very familiar to those who are used to them, and for new players, I would highly recommend them, just because of how streamlined the map is. It's got no difficult quirks to it. It is very much a shallow river to cross with resources in corners, and a very highly contestable victory point in the middle on a land bridge. If it's your first time playing Company of Heroes, I would definitely recommend that Crossing be the map that you do it on.
Okay, let's talk about our community map,
Yes.
Jebel Pass. What can you tell me about this?
So, as we mentioned in the previous live streams leading up to this one, we've gotten the community map train rolling again. Jebel Pass has been one that's been in the hopper for a long time because we've known GB Pirate for a very long time as well. We've worked closely with him and are continuing to do so. Jebel Pass has been in a couple of tournaments, but under a different name. It was originally called Kasserine Pass and I think Tunisian Pass, and has now gone to Jebel Pass to help it stand out from any other maps. It was also completely redesigned for this patch. GB made the original version, still wasn't satisfied with how it was done, so decided to go entirely back to the drawing board, build the entire thing from scratch all over again, which is no mean feat, which we're very grateful for as well, because it's a huge undertaking. So the version that you'll be playing is not the same as the old versions that you'd be used to if you played it on the workshop or in tournaments, but it is still very much a competitive 1v1 map based in the desert.
And I will say, it looks beautiful as well.
It does.
When I was playing it, every time I look in a new corner, there's something new to sort of discover and gawk at. So I do have a little bit of a write-up here from GB Pirates, so I'll just dive right into that. He says, Jebel Pass has been a long time in the making. First, a casual project to learn how to use the Essence Editor, then a competitive map for the Master League in early 2023, then a complete overhaul based on detailed feedback from Will. Who could that be? Jebel Pass takes inspiration from not only the Battle of Kasserine Pass, but many other battles for equally important mountain passes around the same time in Tunisia. Thank you to the community members clandestinely testing and giving valuable feedback on the map, and a shout out to K-Pen for his aesthetic advice. Working with Will and the folks at Relic on this map has been a treat. It's clear how passionate you all are about Company of Heroes 3, even after so many years of development and post-launch support. Much love, GB Pirate. So thanks, GB Pirates. Will, any sort of additional insight on the work that you did with him to get this map ready for the auto match pool?
Yeah. So I'm sure I've mentioned before, but the process of bringing community maps online unfortunately isn't as streamlined as you might think. We can't just take a map from the workshop and drop it in. What we'd usually do is work quite closely with the original designer of the map for a couple of months before we consider integrating it. And in those months, we will do some playtests, we'll look through feedback, we'll generally give as much advice as possible, because once we take their map and put it in our own internal builds, that's the last time they can really touch it. And then the onus is on me to get the map finished. And what I will do then is take it through what we call a V3 pass, which is a final design pass. It'll be getting the title and the description of the map localized in different languages. I'll create a custom minimap for it, and I will just go through and do pathfinding tests and make sure everything works the way that we'd hope any of our official maps would as well. So it's quite a hands-on process. It's so worth it, though. It's amazing to bring in community maps, the amount of work that's put into them. And it's worth adding that the GB Pirate is just a testament to the whole process. He among many of our other mappers, have gone through so much work and feedback and iteration. He's not afraid to kill his darlings, as he'd say. He's ripped up and rebuilt his own map over and over again in order to get it where he's happy with it. And it is a work of art for a lot of our designers and community mappers. So if you are considering making maps yourself, it might be scary to begin with, but we love it. And we hope you will too. It's such a therapeutic process, even if you are having to rip things up and build them again.
I think that that's a phenomenal segue, Will. Thank you for setting me up
welcome.
into talking about GB Pirates map making competition.
Yes.
So we're very happy here at Relic to be sponsoring that. We've put forward a $2,000 prize pool. I know GB Pirates also got some additional funds for that prize pool as well. So that is still open for submissions until March 2nd. So you got a couple of weeks once this video goes live. And that competition is accepting original maps in any category from 1v1 to 4v4. I think it's, again, a great opportunity for people to take a dip into making their own maps and potentially walking away with some prize funds. And again, who knows? If we like something that we see in that competition, doesn't necessarily have to come first. If we see any of the submissions that catch our eye, I'm sure, Will, you might be reaching out to say like, hey, can we get this into the game?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm always watching the Steam Workshop like a hawk. As soon as I see something that I want, I will immediately get in touch.
Okay.
Yeah, and don't be afraid as well if it's your first map or if you've never touched a level editor before. This was the level editor I started with on Company of Heroes 1, and I've been hooked ever since. I can't paint, I can't draw, but I can apparently build maps, and that's something that I've thoroughly enjoyed ever since. So please give it a try.
And again, we also have our Map Making 101 video series, which you can find on our YouTube channel if you want to go and get some step-by-step instructions from Will himself. I think last but certainly not least, we also want to call out the official Relic Entertainment Discord. We have the Company of Heroes 3 category there where we're always accepting map feedback. Anything you want to say on that, Will?
Yeah, so in this patch as well, we have done some minor adjustments to most of the map pool. Nothing significant enough to call out in a live stream. But we are always taking in feedback and we are always integrating it. As soon as I see something, I will usually work on it. You might see a little emoji of bacon, just so I remember that I've looked at it and I've processed what you said. But yeah, don't ever sit on problems with maps. If you ever come across something that you think this is a balance issue, this is a pathfinding issue, whatever, just let us know where it is. You don't even have to take screenshots, although that does help. But just say, had an issue, it was here, can you do something? Do something. And I will do something.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we want our maps to work exactly as you want them to work.
Yeah.
So let us know.
And again, that's in the map feedback section on the official Discord. And I think that's a great place to end things. So there you have it, folks. We have 5 brand new maps, or I guess 4 classic maps. Sorry, 3 classic maps. 2 with 2 versions, or 1 with 2 versions, and a community map. 5 total coming
5 total maps.
Coming to all game modes in Company of Heroes 3 in the 2.0 anniversary update. And I think that's going to do it. Thank you so much, Will. Appreciate your time as always.
Anytime.
And now I am joined by Jason and Darren to talk about all things multiplayer balance in Company of Heroes 3. For those that don't know you, let's do some quick intros. Jason, let's start with you.
I'm Jason. I'm lead balance designer on Company of Heroes 3.
And Darren?
Hey, my name's Darren Chan, and I'm one of the gameplay designers for Company of Heroes 3.
Awesome. So obviously we have a pretty huge shakeup to multiplayer with the Fire and Steel DLC battle groups, 4 brand new battle groups, 1 for each faction. That's obviously adding a ton of stuff to the game already. So how are we kind of tackling things from the balance perspective? Are we kind of doing work in anticipation of the impact that those battle groups are going to have on the meta, or are we kind of just slotting those in and doing some additional changes on the side? Jason, maybe you can talk about like your approach for how you're tackling things.
So yeah, the new battle groups are intended to kind of slot into the game as is. There are some minor things that we have to consider, but for the most part, they are developed and balanced around the existing game. As additional options and battle groups, they're not really meant to completely throw off the way all of the other battle groups play. It's just meant to be another option that adds new gameplay to the game. So yeah, it should slot in.
Okay, that's great to know. So, Darren, maybe you can outline some of the larger sort of general changes that we've got going on in the 2nd anniversary update. What have we been doing outside of all of the work for battle groups?
So we have taken time to go through some of our vehicles in the game. we wanted to make positioning a bit more important for vehicles and a little bit more rewarding for facing your armor correctly or getting into advantageous positions, like getting to the enemy's rear armor on heavier vehicles, because we're finding most players, or in the game in general, once you got to the side armor, you didn't really need to start hitting the rear armor of the heavier tanks because you could just generally go through the side. So we're doing a significant change to most of the heavier vehicles in the game, not the light vehicles, where they will start taking additional damage if you hit them in the rear armor, because we just want players to make positioning more important and also getting to that, much smaller place on the vehicle on the back compared to Code 2, more important.
Right.
And a key decision that you can make.
Okay. Jason, what else? What other sort of general stuff have we been looking at?
We have quite a few other general changes, but the vehicle rear armor is a big part. Some of the other changes, we originally intended this patch to do quite a large overhaul of vehicles, kind of similar to what we did with TTK and Vet. But as we kind of worked on it longer and longer, production realities, but B, we didn't find that there were that many cases where we need to do major shifts. So rather than doing one really big patch, we're going to be just doing spot changes over time.
Okay.
So some examples of spot changes for this one is some of the penetration values for vehicles at point blank range have been reduced. Something we noticed was that the pen rate to, for example, side armor in particular, was too extreme, where a lot of vehicles, if you drove them right up to a vehicle and shot them through the side, they essentially just didn't have armor. So we're reducing that for a few vehicles in particular. We're also doing quite a lot of minor balance tweaks to a lot of vehicles. So you'll see a lot of the mid-game vehicles for USF and Wehrmacht have gotten better. Another example of this is that we actually moved Tier 4 back slightly by raising their fuel costs.
Okay.
We were noticing that rushing to Tier 4 was a little too prevalent. So, and mid-game vehicles were kind of having less of an impact on the game. So what we wanted to do is lower that, and then we also raised the power of the mid-game vehicles slightly for some of the factions that were lacking it.
Okay. Yeah, I know we had that sort of vehicle work plotted out on the roadmap whenever we released that originally, like back in the summer or fall. I think it's just a good example of like how things can change over the course of a game's lifespan and during like production. So I'm glad that you called that out. Darren, what other changes can players expect in this update?
For like large system changes, we have done a pass on our field defenses, so we have done significant changes there, particularly now field defenses for like sandbags, wire. Most of those options will now build significantly faster, but now it will also come at the cost of like you will no longer be able to capture while you're building field defenses. As we're finding in the game, people generally did not build like the lighter field defenses unless they were on capture duty, just because it took so long to build them. So the only time you really had to put them down was on the capture points,
Right.
because that's the only time you would generally spend a significant amount of your, I guess, time. I'm just sitting around doing nothing. So might as well build something like a sandbag.
Yeah.
And that was a problem for us as balancers in particular, because we wanted to make building sandbags or field defenses in general like in the general parts of the map more powerful. But we already knew that building sandbags in particular near capture points was already quite strong. And there wasn't really a way to buff one without buffing the other. So our decision was essentially to remove, or you can no longer capture while building. So you have to choose one or the other. But this also flattens the kind of the value of building anywhere on the map versus on a capture point. So the idea this way is that this gives us the room in the future, if we want to make continuous changes, to make field defenses more powerful without necessarily just rewarding that play pattern. Because we also think that play pattern is also not that strategic, right? It already makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of a nice trick. But also for a lot of players, it's somewhat of a micro tax, and it's just something you kind of have to know. Once you know, it's intuitive, but it's very much like a hidden trick that gives you a lot of extra power.
Right.
Now we do know these changes have disproportionate impacts on different factions. Wehrmacht is probably the biggest loser from these changes, and we are keeping a close eye on this. For now, we did make a lot of other changes that should balance this out, but the impacts of this we're not completely sure. So we'll be keeping a close eye on it.
Okay. And I understand that we changed the way that certain vehicles will interact with barbed wire. Darren, can you explain that a little bit?
Yep. Yep. Since barbed wire is generally so easily removed in our game because vehicles just need to touch it to essentially destroy a piece of barbed wire, we're now making there be a consequence for running over barbed wire if you're the lighter vehicles for the most part. Alright, so if you run over barbed wire, you will get a speed debuff. So that means if you do decide to make the decision to run into barbed wire with your light vehicles to remove them, you are taking that risk of being slowed down significantly and possibly letting your opponent take advantage of that, depending if they're in a defensive position or not. And it also rewards you for putting down like some of these early defenses is that you spend time doing because prior or it's like, oh, you get barbed wire up, you stop infantry, but you don't really stop anything else.
Right.
And it pretty much becomes you pretty much don't bother with wire outside the first few minutes of the game.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were also some minor improvements to things like demo charges and the gap between tank traps as you build them. So both of those are going to be much more efficient. The demo charges have also changed the Goliath, which we kind of consider tied together as kind of a mobile demo charge, essentially.
Yeah.
So expect to see those to be significantly better. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Are there any other sort of general changes to any systems or
Yeah.
unit types?
So some of the other vehicle changes that we got was we changed the machine guns on a lot of our vehicles. A lot of them were not tuned correctly, so they either did too much damage, or the more common case, they just kind of didn't really have an impact. And we did want a lot of these things to matter because one big part of using hull machine guns and pintols was that or coaxes was that it required you to position your vehicles correctly. And so we wanted to have a more meaningful difference between running at a vehicle from the front and face tanking all of the machine guns versus, from any other direction. So that's another change. It wasn't that significant of a change for all of the vehicles, but some vehicles have gotten much better with the machine guns.
I'll add to that. The biggest significant winner is generally the pintle mounts for the machine guns. They did a little bit they didn't do enough damage at long range, despite the fact you would pay a significant munition cost into them for
Right, yeah.
the turreted medium tank. So those are made much better. And when you combine that with the other two buffs to the hull and coaxial machine guns, this will make tanks quite a bit more threatening at range, but it also means cover is now more important to take against vehicles because machine guns are much less effective against units in cover compared to, say,
Yeah.
the tank's main gun.
Okay, very cool. Should we jump into some of the faction changes, or was there
Yeah.
anything else?
Yeah, let's jump straight into it.
Okay, what have we done with the U.S. forces?
You want to start?
You can start with the Chaffee.
Sure. So the Chaffee has seen quite a few different changes. We've lowered its cost, we've increased some of its base mobility, and we gave it a new ability, the Smoke Shot. The concept is to essentially make the Chaffee slightly more usable because a lot of the scenarios where it was quite good before have been somewhat reduced. So the big culprit is 8-rad spam not really being that much of a thing anymore. But yeah, we wanted to give the Chaffee some alternative roles. And we're going to keep a close eye on the unit because we do know this unit can spike quite heavily in either way. It either becomes really used or can be really unused. So which is currently. So we're going to make those changes. We also have quite a few small changes to things like the Pathfinders and the Assault Engineers. We were noticing that in 1v1 in particular, players were able to flood the map quite early and to really big success, essentially, and shut down, especially Wehrmacht, before they could kind of get going by following it up with things like the M3 half-track. So we made quite a few changes or small changes, but we've made quite a few small changes to each of these units to slow it down a bit and also make the transition weaker.
Okay, and I imagine that would also encourage some early game unit diversity as well, so you're not just sort of spamming one strategy. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else for the U.S. forces? No, that's it. All right.
Well, one other major change though
Yeah.
is the MSC. has
Okay.
been changed.
Yep.
So originally it unlocked the straight up buildable of the 75 mil and the quad in the WSC, and we have moved that to the motor pool. However, we've also made the change where you no longer have to pay a premium to build these vehicles, so they cost exactly the same as the base half track. This basically means allows MSC builds to be a little bit more flexible and also reduce the power of some of the early game half track spam that you could potentially do, which is also relevant because heavy weapons, the new battle group for USF, does lean into that quite a lot. So this is one of the few preemptive changes as well. The idea is to also make the half-track spam more conductive with the other light vehicles. You used to have to choose, which you still can. If you go WSC, you can still hard build them and upgrade them. We haven't changed that, but it allows, if you want to go very heavy into light vehicles, a path into motor pool.
Okay. So let's maybe get into the Wehrmacht.
Yep.
I think we're doing some stuff with their teching from some of the playtesting that we've done. So can we maybe talk about what we've done with their tiers and their buildings?
So for Wehrmacht, we were noticing, and this goes with the previous change of us delaying the tier 4, Wehrmacht generally, outside of maybe extended Luftwaffe company play, they didn't really play on an extended tier 2.5 or 3.5 for the Luftwaffe and Panzergrenadier building, because those units, once you hit a certain point in the game, particularly in the late game, you were kind of stuck on that sort of tech if you wanted to play an extended version, and you were not able to upgrade it. So the biggest change we have done for the tiers is make armored skirts available for all the Wehrmacht vehicles once you've unlocked support elements for either the Luftwaffe or Panzergrenadier company. So if you want to go into that like extended tier of not the medium tanks but medium vehicles, you can do that at the cost of, you know, paying the additional price early on for
Right.
those units, but it does allow you to now extend out that sort of play rather than like, all right, I have to go to tier 4, or if I want to hold on at this point of the game, you can now play a more extended in mid-game tier. In addition, we have quite a few changes to the West. We have heard the concerns, but due to things like production, and we haven't been able to get them in, but there are significant changes coming to the West, particularly its tracking barrage. So it'll still remain more accurate than the standard fire, but now it's going to take longer to arrive, as it will always fire in a high angle arc, and it will be a little bit less accurate than it was before. So it gives players more time to dodge and react to the West tracking units.
Okay. So hopefully not too overbearing moving forward after this.
Yeah, the West was very much overperforming, and unfortunately, we couldn't change that in live soon enough. The one of the biggest issues was that, unfortunately, due to some essentially a bug, the main barrage got much more accurate than it should have been, which was very much. Like that on top of the tracking barrage overperforming really kicked the unit into high gear essentially. So both of those are going to be getting tuned back. So and to be clear, the nerfs, so to speak, at least that nerf in particular, is more of a bug fix. But it is a reduction in the performance of the vehicle.
Essentially reverts it back to where it should have been, which is on par with the Bishop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else for the Wehrmacht?
Yeah, there are some more minor changes for Wehrmacht, but we could probably. Yeah.
What about the British forces?
For Brits, one of the main changes was the base howitzer is now stronger. We buffed it so that we noticed that it wasn't really that useful, even in the role of essentially area denial. And that, so what we did was that we raised the amount of shells it fired, for example, and raised the performance of the weapon.
We've also did a lot of responsive changes to the base howitzer, so now we'll be able to, your artillery barrage will now arrive a bit faster than it would previously. So it should allow, like, if you go early recce package, it makes that first barrage a bit more devastating to early MGs or defensive play.
Okay. Any other changes for the Brits that people can expect?
We have done a major change to light vehicle training. We noticed some of the bonuses just didn't play with certain units, so we have done a significant change of changing the modifiers to reload and ability recharge. So units like the Bishop are affected, but also it affects the general British vehicle light vehicle roster, as the majority of them have quite a number of abilities that are good, but you know, they take a long time to recharge. So having those off cooldown faster makes those British light vehicles, if you preserve them into the mid to late game, much more useful.
Yeah, we also noticed that Brits in some scenarios struggled early on, and we wanted to smooth out some of their difficulties in the early mid game phase. So there were some changes, reductions to the tier cost, and a buff to the base Tommy.
Okay.
They're going to be slightly more scary to units that are running at them at close range. And also, once they hit vet 1, they're going to be much more scary to or not much more, but a bit more scary to units that are in the open to kind of cement the role. Because before infantry training, they were somewhat easy to kind of run circles around for a lot of players, and that was an issue. So with some of these changes, the Brits mid game should be quite a lot better.
Okay, that's great to hear. What about the Deutsche Afrika Corps? What have we done with those folks?
So we have made a significant change. One of them is the GRB grenade launcher. This does apply to both Axis factions, but for the DAC in particular, they're now having immediate access to the grenade launcher, so they can buy it without needing to wait for tech. As we notice, most people generally wouldn't get the grenade launcher. You would generally get either the support package for them or the flamethrower, because it arrived much earlier than, say, the GRB, and you generally didn't have that many Panzer Pioneers running around. But we have also significantly buffed the GRB in the role that we want it to be, which is essentially more of a long-range flamethrower that's effective against units in cover or garrisons, while still being fairly weak against units in the open. So now the GRB will be much more useful for clearing positions than it was before, where prior it would struggle to occasionally clear infantry, especially if you only had like 1 or 2 GRBs.
Okay. Jason, what else have we touched on here?
Yeah. So a light change, but I think this probably would make bigger of a difference, is the Panzer Grenadiers' veterancy ability has been raised. The duration has been raised, essentially doubled from 15 to 30 seconds. This means that you could support more infantry units with the same amount of vehicles, which we were noticing it was kind of difficult to get all of the value out of the ability to begin with, but also it was a lot of micro to get what was somewhat of a marginal bonus. So we buffed that. Another change, though this is also to both factions, is the ability on the Panzer III and the Panzer IV has been essentially reworked. We've known for a while that this ability has been somewhat difficult at best to use and sometimes quite unrewarding. It also just didn't feel that good to use. So we've adjusted it where it gives you the benefit essentially upfront. So you get a reload bonus right away. And then we give you essentially a malus after the fact, giving you kind of a window to exploit the advantage, and then a window for your opponent to essentially fight back, for the player to kind of play around. So this should make the micro for both of these vehicles much more interesting,
Okay.
Which is our goal.
And just to clarify, that's for both the Panzer III for the DAC and the Panzer IV for the Wehrmacht.
So,
Yeah, and the DAC.
Okay, and the DAC, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't forget that.
Gotcha. What about the Semavente? That's the last one here on my list.
Yeah. So the Semavente has been somewhat of an unused unit for quite a while, and it's been difficult to figure out a good role for it. Our current idea essentially is to make it somewhat of a hybrid between the Martyr's tank destroyer and the standard the Stug. So between the brawler and the long-range sniper role, essentially, to make it a fairly good mid-range vehicle that's fairly mobile. So it's going to lean much more into its AT role than before, and it's going to be more effective, essentially.
Okay, very cool. I think that kind of covers all of the faction changes that we had on our list here. Maybe we want to talk about, again, sort of final thoughts here on all of the balance changes coming into the update, along with the new battle groups. Darren, what should players be watching out for in multiplayer? What do you want them to be experiencing? Like, what are your just sort of general thoughts once players get their hands on the anniversary update?
I think for the most part we're not doing a significant change to like like a major system change in the game compared to prior patches. So we're mainly hoping that this patch will tone down some of the certain meta strategies that are just not fun to play against, such as flooding the U.S. flooding the field in 1v1 or the artillery spam that comes in the 4v4. But we're also hoping that some of the more unused abilities will become a bit more useful for the number of changes we get, and we have a little bit more variety into the game. I'm also hoping that the Typhoon anti-tank loiter will finally be useful. There's another change we're doing to the game.
Yeah.
We have quite a few minor changes that should have an impact. One we didn't mention was like the whiz bang is getting a tune-up, as another example. So we're hoping to kind of switch up the meta of the base game to begin with, though we are expecting the new battle groups to make quite a splash as well. Again, for 1v1s, I guess, to kind of break it down, in 1v1s, you should expect to see a little bit more mid-game play before going straight to late game. And for 4v4s, we're kind of pulling back a little bit on some of the late game access artillery in particular. And then, we're giving a few more options to play with different units in the team games months. So we're hoping players are really excited for the new battle groups, and the way they'll impact a lot of these changes and the way these factions play, because all the new battle groups should be giving new play styles essentially to all of the different factions. So that should hopefully spice up team games in particular quite a lot.
I can't believe you're nerfing the Axis artillery, Jason. All the players keep telling me that we're Axis biased. Why do you have to prove them wrong like this? Anyways, I'm super excited for all the changes, obviously coming in the second anniversary update. Again, the new battle groups are going to have a huge impact. So we're eagerly anticipating a lot of feedback. So please keep that coming once you get your hands on all this new stuff. I guess we'll just kind of end things there. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Jason. Again, we're just looking forward to players getting their hands on this stuff and sending us their feedback. Any sort of final thoughts?
Go out and have fun.
Try out the new battle groups.
All right. Thanks, folks. That's going to do it for today. Again, a huge thank you to the team for joining me to talk about all of their work going into the second anniversary update. As always, if you want to stay up to date on the latest Company of Heroes news, be sure to follow us on your platform of choice: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Twitch at Company of Heroes. You can join our Discord server at discord.gg/Relic Entertainment. The second anniversary patch notes will go up on Steam the morning of February 25th, so keep an eye out for those. And of course, that same day, our new heavy tank battle groups will be available on the Steam store in the Fire and Steel DLC pack. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy the update, and we will see you next time.